All right. Hi, Emmanuel. Hi, Richard. Thank you so much for joining me here today on Vonvo.com. Today's
Thank you,
date
Matt.
is April 15th, 2013, and we're here to discuss the persecution going on against the Rohingya people. Just to let you know before we get started, right now this conversation is being recorded, and after the recording is completed, we'll be uploading this video to our YouTube channel. Is that okay with both of you?
That's fine.
Great. And then on top of that, here at Vonvo,
No problem.
we're all about our discussion staying both civil and valuable, so we don't want there to be any personal attacks against anyone. Are you guys fine with that as well?
Yes.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm very unlikely to fall out with either of these two people. So.
All right,
I
great.
don't think will happen.
All right, so what I was going to say is let's get our conversation started. For anyone who's watching this conversation or who's going to watch it in the future, would you each mind just giving a quick background of yourself and why you're so passionate about this topic? And Richard, you could go first, and then Emmanuel, you could go right after.
Okay. My background is been involved in my personal life is social work and mental health. So I've been working in that field for a while, which is completely detached from any world politics or anything of that nature. But I've always been drawn to and cared about these things, and for the past year or so, I've been in contact with Jamila on this issue, and we've all been working together and watching this momentum build. So that's my main background on this subject.
Great. And Emmanuel, you could go next. And just quickly, Jamila, do you hear us? And do you want to just try and say something quickly?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Now we hear you.
Yeah.
All right, so Emmanuel, Emmanuel, why don't you just give a quick background of yourself, why you're so passionate about this topic, and then Jamila, you can do that last. You can go next.
No problem at all. My name's Emmanuel Stokes, as you probably noticed. I'm a freelance journalist hailing from the UK. I've written for a number of publications, typically about conflict and human rights issues. The Rohingya issue certainly was something of note around the middle of last year, although I'd heard about it before and I wanted to find out more. And the violence in Sitwe, which happened around June 2012, which led to an awful lot of misery for the Rohingya people, really caught my attention. And I'm very interested in ethnic conflicts which are not being covered as a journalist. It interests me, firstly, why they're not being covered, and also what the crucial issues are involved with those conflicts. And so naturally that drew me towards it. A bit later I got some leads on the story. I wrote one article. I got contacted by people who were, who read it and were interested in sort of sharing more information with me. And as a result, I got to know activists and got to some degree involved with sort of various schemes to try and help the Rohingya, because I care about what's happening there as well, wanting to report as objectively and accurately as I can about the real situation.
Okay, great. And Jamila, would you mind just giving a quick background of yourself and why you're so passionate about this issue?
Well, I'm a web developer, but I've been working in the area of human rights as an activist, I guess, for a few years. I was approached last summer by a friend who had heard what was happening when the first massacre broke out. And she just got in touch and said, there's something awful going on here. Can you help these people? At the time, I didn't know anything about Burma or the Rohingya, but said, yeah, sure, I'll have a look. And she sent me a few video clips, and they instantly just really touched my heart in a big way. You just look at those and you know that something very, very wrong is happening there, and something that wasn't being covered by the media. But for myself personally, I felt I couldn't offer anything to any campaign because I had no contacts in Burma. But within a few days, she had got the offer of an interview with a village leader who was there at the time that the fires and everything were happening. So we interviewed him over a few weeks and tried to get him help. It it was absolutely awful what we learned from him, and to know that we were kind of like his lifeline, and he was pleading with us for help, for food, for us to save their lives. There were people dying from untreated injuries. His village was still intact, but the surrounding villages had been burnt, and people had taken refuge in his village, but they had no food and no health care. So that's how I got involved, just really thrown in at the deep end. And from there, started trying desperately to raise awareness online and to contact organisations and try and get this particular group of villagers some help. But since then, it went quiet after summer, and then it kicked off again in October. And it was at that time that I noticed somebody tweeting. It was actually from the Rohingya displacement camps in Sitwe, and that's along Sitwe, who many people follow now. And I just followed his tweets daily and communicated with him, and he opened up to me. We became friends, and he confided in me. So then I went about desperately trying to contact people and to say, this person on Twitter is real, and he really is there, and these things really are happening, and you have to listen to him. And the campaign just grew from there, really. But it's been,
right.
It's a very personal thing, you get to know people personally, and
right.
Yeah,
so,
it takes over.
Right. So, I mean, just because we've never featured a discussion on this topic, and a lot of our viewers and people who know Vonvo have not really heard about this, I want to think. Emmanuel, can you just maybe start, and then each of you can kind of chime in on really what this topic is all about, and like what's the history of it, and then maybe you want to like save a few details for each one of you, but like kind of this is more like an information session at this point because we don't really know that much about this. So, do you want to maybe start on that, Emmanuel? Maybe the history of it.
Sure. I mean, you've got this ostensive reforms government in Burma, and they have made some genuine reforms which are obviously welcome and are helping a lot of people who are living there. But for the Rohingya, life has been continually, for decades, experience of continual oppression. There was a real major sort of moment in about 1978, after decades of official sort of persecution by the junta who ruled the country from 1962 onwards. There was something called the King Dragon operation, which was intended to sort of root out all potential members of a supposed terrorist group, and which ended up seriously targeting civilians and drove them all across the border into Bangladesh. During that time, there were accounts of rapes, massacres with total impunity. Sort of every imaginable sort of serious crime that a rogue state can commit. And from then, in 1982, you had something which was a really key thing, which is the citizenship law, which means that most Rohingya are now effectively considered non-citizens, and as a result have most of the human rights, or a certain large portion of their crucial human rights as ensured under the Geneva Convention denied. And up until, I think, about 10 years later, that's 1992, it's very, very interesting. That's 20 years ago, all over. You can read, the exact same sort of violence and persecution that they're experiencing now, allegedly with state backing. In those days, human rights groups really felt quite sure that it was with state backing. And it's been a continual theme in their lives since independence, before things weren't so good. And so now, more recently in 2012, a lot of anti-Muslim feeling has been up on the boil, and some people are sort of putting that down to the fact that there's liberalising in the country, and as a result, the lids are taken off and all that sort of thing. But I think it's a bit more complex than that. There seems to be an organised element to a lot of the attacks on the Rohingya, which credible sources have indicated have some government involvement, and certainly they kind of weren't stopping a lot of the violence. But it broke out in 2012 after an alleged rape of a ethnically Rakhine woman. So I should explain the sort of ethnic dimensions to what's going on in the western Rakhine state of Burma. Sorry.
Well, so what I was going to say is, like, maybe
Go ahead.
Richard, like who are these people? Like uh, what's their background? I know, based on a map, this is right near Thailand. So are these, residents or, citizens of Thailand? Can you just give us a background who these people are?
The Rohingya.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what you're going to hear from within Burma is that they're from Bangladesh, which is false entirely. You'll have different accounts of how long the Rohingya have been within these borders in Burma and Rakhine State. The estimates go anywhere between 150 years and 800 years. But as Emmanuel said, they took away citizenship in 1982, effectively claiming they were Bengali, they had no right to be there, and to this day, the government's ultimate plan openly is to deport them.
Right. So what's their main reasoning for why they're just not claiming that they actually are from that area? You're saying that they're claiming that they're from Bangladesh. Like, what's this? Is this like a fight over like some past history back 800 years ago, or just like displacement of certain people? What would be the reason why they claim they're from somewhere else?
Well, they're ethnically and religiously different.
Okay.
I think it boils down to that. They're Muslim, and ethnically they are more similar to Bengali than someone in the East, which would be a lighter complexion and ethnically closer to often China or Burmese or any of these things.
Great. So, Jamila, do you have anything that you want to add on top of what these two men just said to bring up, or anything else that other people should know, about this?
Yeah. Well, the evidence that we've been presented with from various sources suggests that the Rohingya have been living there hundreds of years. I listened to a historian actually on the radio some time back saying how that the Rohingya originated alongside the river which borders Bangladesh and Burma, and lived on both sides of it. So this is where they have originated from. They are seen as a symbol of the British Empire because it was known that the British brought some additional Muslim workers to help build infrastructure. And when they were left, they were then used, I think, as the scapegoat of the country's problems, and were persecuted from that point onwards. But it gradually got worse. I think the historical evidence clearly shows that they have always lived there, and that they certainly have rights to citizenship. That it was removed from them in 1982 is a massive injustice that needs correcting. But the Burmese have rewritten history, it seems, and there's even been a book published on this to try and rewrite the history, which is often referred to by people in Burma. In Burma itself, or Myanmar, it seems that the majority of people really do hate the Rohingya. Seems that way on the surface because there's been a huge amount of propaganda against these people, which over the years has really had an effect. So a lot of people in Burma really don't know the truth and don't know the facts, and what they have been spoon-fed daily through the media, they believe it to be true. Even very educated people, it's very hard to re-educate a whole entire population from outside of the country without central government support. And it seems that the government is now using those misconceptions to fulfill its political aims. And in the past, up until a couple of years ago, when the Burmese government declared that it was moving towards democracy, before that it was widely known that the government and the military junta persecuted these people. It was widely known and documented on numerous occasions, crimes against humanity on a terrible, terrible scale. So that was widely accepted worldwide. Every government knew it. So it seems in the past couple of years, that whole history has just been forgotten. And facts and documents and reports. And what we are now doing as activists is trying to remind people that this has been going on for decades. It's well documented. All the evidence is there. It's really crazy that we're having to try and prove that there's government involvement in this when the government have been persecuting them clearly for decades. And just now, all of a sudden, it's ethnic tension and intercommunal violence. And it seems worldwide governments are buying this story because it's convenient for their business.
Right. So, Emmanuel, what's exactly happening to these people in terms of like on the persecution, and that probably is, one of the topics that probably gets avoided the most. So, would you mind talking about what's really happening to them? Are they just getting displaced, or?
Well, I mean, displaced last year by a massive outbreak of violence, which appeared to be well organised and had elements of at least local government and police, security force complicity, probably with some element of central government complicity, but we don't know how much, or indeed if it's entirely sure that was the case, although most people suspected. So what happened in 2012 was there was this alleged rape which took place, which many people believe took place, of a young lady from the ethnic majority in the state where most of the Rohingya people live, and the Rakhine people are mostly Buddhists, and most of the Rohingyas are Muslims, so there's already that sort of tension there. And subsequently, I think there were attacks, sort of revenge attacks, and massive ethnic tensions as a result of this single event, which I'm not entirely sure actually what the facts are about that, actually. I don't think too many people are. And that led to, just huge organised acts of arson, which razed homes to the ground in Sitwe. And I've been to the location of some of the IDP camps where tens of thousands of people are living in extremely unsanitary conditions, who are made homeless and been displaced by that. And then you've got people throughout the rest of Rakhine State in the west of Burma who are Rohingya, who are also in camps, which are probably a lot worse off, which is very hard to get in and have a look at as a journalist, or even in some cases as a humanitarian worker. And then you also have Rohingya people who live, as in Sitwe, there's one township which is now still, a part of the main town, which I think is called Vonvo, and that's guarded by policemen. It's got, sort of barbed wire across it, and people can't really leave. Most Rohingya people, they have to. I still think it's the case that they have to pay money and go for a sort of bureaucratic process, even to marry. Other races, other ethnicities in that country don't have that. They've got issues, even just travelling from town to town. And in some ways, the IDP camps are safer in the event of another massive outbreak of ethnic violence, which is typically led by the Rakhine people, or a select number of Rakhine people. I'm not saying it's all of them, obviously, but and those people who are, sort of living in a shared community with other Rakhines, are sort of that much more vulnerable. They also, most Rohingya people are not allowed to trade with so-called civilians, citizens, whereas they themselves are non-citizens. So as a result, they have very, very little access to any sort of form of livelihood. And in some cases, particularly with the coming rainy season, where the spread of disease is going to be absolutely atrocious, these people are going to be in a truly dire situation. And many respected international NGOs have talked about a humanitarian disaster which could kill thousands of people, particularly in the IDP camps. And the government is doing very, very little, next to nothing. And they've been warned. No, there's no real excuse, for their lack of action.
Right. So, I guess what I would ask next is, first off, in the text chat, Kenneth asked a really interesting question that I thought would be good to address, which is, why is the Christian minority, relatively the same demographic percentage, has not experienced the same persecution nor demanded a state for themselves in Burma? Richard, do you want to maybe address that?
Sure. I mean, The Kachin are persecuted. I mean, there's been several stories on this. The government's actually been in an ongoing conflict with them. The difference is, for one, they're citizens, and secondly, they're armed. They have a very large militia, and so what you have is a more direct conflict. But they've experienced a lot of the state persecution as well. They've been driven away from villages that they were from, very often on the same lines of where oil and gas pipelines are going through. So, no, they've also been persecuted. This isn't not a one-sided issue. It's not only the Rohingya. It's just that the Rohingya are stateless. They don't have weapons. They don't have the same chance that the Kachin do.
Right. So
I'm curious about
go ahead, Jamil.
I'm curious about the comment there. Demanded a state for themselves in Burma. The Rohingya aren't demanding a state for themselves. This is the propaganda line, actually, that is put forward, that they've never demanded a state for themselves. The Rakhine, actually, many of them would have been arguing and pushing for independence, but the Rohingya have never asked for independence.
Right.
They want citizenship.
Yeah, feel free to comment on whatever you'd like. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, the Rohingya, there was in 1927, if we look at the down to nitty-gritty, a group called the Mujahid Party who did want a separate state after independence and in that whole thing. But, that's not the case now for the majority. I mean, some Rohingya may want that in order to have some protection, but it's not an official thing that they're asking for in any way. And the majority of people just want what they should be getting, which is to get their rights as ensured under the Geneva Convention, and access this as just basic means of livelihood and dignity through having citizenship. Very, very simple thing. But on the Kachin issue, because there are members of the Kachin movement, that are like Richard was saying, who do want a separate state. So, if you're going to be factual about it, you've got to bear that in mind. Quintana, Thomas Quintana, who's the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights, recently came out and talked about some credible evidence of Burmese army members torturing Kachins, and maintained that he had received reports of state involvement in some of the violence. So, the Kachins are being very badly treated as well. Now, the issue is with regard to the comparison between the Kachin and the Rohingya, is the Rohingya are suffering so much more. There aren't, it's more chronic, although the Kachins have also been horrendously mistreated. And they're also another non-Buddhist group, which is usually an indicator of whether or not they're going to be marginalised, unfortunately. It's just that the Rohingya situation is that much more extreme, but the two are comparable.
Great. So, what I guess I would ask next is, in terms of what other international countries in that region are doing, can you guys talk about on that front, what some of the other mainland countries in that area, how they're reacting to it, what they're doing? Are they just totally ignoring the situation? And either you can try and address that. Jamila, if you want to go.
Who wants it?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. The question was regarding the surrounding states. Is that what you said? Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. What's going on an international level in regards to this?
Oh, on an international level.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, in the immediate area, of course, you've got the problem that no country wants the Rohingya to enter their land. They're pushed back from Bangladesh. There's already up to 300,000 living mostly in unregistered camps there. But when this new conflict broke out, the borders were shut, and the Rohingya are also badly persecuted in those camps in Bangladesh. In Thailand, a lot of Rohingya have been trying to escape to Thailand. That's been in the news a lot recently. Many of them are now held in prison. Some of them a few were actually shot and killed. And mostly what the Thai government do is they have a policy of helping on the boats. It's what they call it, which means they try not to let them land, just give them a bit of food and water and send them on to Malaysia. Some of them make it to Malaysia. They're not exactly welcome there, but they are allowed in and allowed to live. India equally don't want anything to do with them. Really, the international response is disgraceful worldwide. In the EU, they are soon to likely be dropping all sanctions against the Burmese government. Equally, that is likely to go the same way in America, the UK, and elsewhere.
Did you say they're gonna drop all sanctions?
Dropping. Yes, they have already temporarily lifted most sanctions, but soon they will be dropped entirely.
What's the reasoning?
In addition to that,
what's the reasoning? Why would they do that if there's this issue going?
They say that because they say that reforms have taken place in Burma. There's a lot of business opportunities now in Burma, and internationally all governments are scrambling for a piece of the Burmese pie, be that in oil contracts or other business major development opportunities. And there's also this rush to have influence over that area, the West competing with China for influence. So this generally, these business influences, pressures generally take priority over human rights, and people believe what they want to believe. So in addition to sanctions being dropped, there's also been huge financial incentives and rewards. The World Bank dropped billions of dollars in debt. The EU and the American government and the UK government have all, and I believe possibly Australia as well, have all awarded huge development grants. They try to portray these grants as being something to do with human rights and for the benefit of the Rohingya, but they're really not. Actually, the fraction that's allocated to the Rohingya is tiny, and there's no evidence that any of it actually gets through. So really, from an activist point of view, my feeling is that the world is complicit in genocide because everybody knows what is happening. Everybody. You know, the facts are there, the videos are there, the Human Rights Watch reports are there, and the international response is disgraceful and hypocritical at every level. They say one thing, they send their delegations, they've even been and seen the camps, they've seen the conditions, but then they walk away and shake hands with the Burmese government and it's business as usual.
Richard and Emmanuel, do you have anything to follow up with that?
Yeah, if I could.
Yeah, go ahead.
Burst in but one of the interesting elements there as well is if you read the latest Human Rights Watch, I suppose you call it release or press release, sort of extended statement on Burma. They're talking about the fact that they're doing nothing, with the rainy season imminent beginning of May, which could lead to massive disaster for the people in the IDP camps and Rohingya. But also they're talking about systematic denial of international aid. So that's a massive thing. The government are not letting the aid that the rest of the the international community are wanting to get to them in, and it's causing a massive problem. That in itself is a scandal. There are certainly the strategic sort of interests going on there with in terms of sort of influencing the region, and certainly like Jamila was saying, sort of fending off China. That is for the West. But also there's the fact that Myanmar is now, as I read, I think in The Economist, might have been somewhere else in the Western business press, is now described as the world's latest or newest economic frontier. It's
are you talking about Burma?
People can go in and make money. It's the untapped resources. Burma, yeah, Burma's also known by the name Myanmar.
And sorry, what resources? What's making this such an attractive business, location? Can you what's all the hype about?
Well, it's sort of virgin territory for sort of massive corporations to go into invest and make huge amounts of money out of. They've got a fair bit of uranium there. There's oil, quite a lot. They have a whole load of other industries, like China are investing in hydro dams and things actually around the Kachin area in Thor, which has been sort of connected to the conflict there, which is interesting. There's a whole load of other industries, but what you've got is a country which is in this extremely important position between India and China. something of a buffer state to some degree between the two, and it's got it's just there are areas where private industry can go in and just compete really a lot better than any of the local industries and companies and start making a fortune. But to some degree, there's elements of that which will bring some good things into Burma. I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad thing. It's a double-edged sword, in my opinion. But the issue is the way that influences Western government policy, and I think it does to some degree. However, I do think there is concern. I think, like any government, like I've got friends who know members of the State Department, you have very concerned individuals, and then they're sharply at odds with other people who have to sort of, they have imperatives and they've got other focuses. So that's where a lot of this sort of hold up in terms of real national action is coming from. But I think it will be led by the West, actually, because of its purchase over the Burmese government, because they helped to bring them in from the cold. So if Obama wants to do more, if Cameron wants to do more, if their foreign officers and State Departments want to do more, I think they could, and I think they could really begin to see some movement on the Rohingya issue from the Burmese if they really wanted it, and they should.
Great. So, the next thing that I guess I'd like to hear you guys sort of, well, first just to clarify. So, in terms of what the Rohingya people want, so people understand, is it really just about wanting a state? Is it about wanting like freedom to travel where they want? Can you just kind of like just clarify what exactly it is that these people want? Do they just want justice? Can you guys talk about that, Richard? You want to maybe discuss that?
Yeah, they want citizenship. They want protection under the law. They want human rights.
Do they want citizenship in their own state? Like for example.
No, in Burma, and they want to be Burmese citizens.
Okay.
And have the rights afforded to them that everybody else in Burma has.
Okay.
Which they don't have now. And when you watch these stories about the riots, every government official will say, we are going to offer complete protection to citizens. That's intentional. What they're saying is that they will protect all groups within Burma with citizenship, and that leaves one group behind.
Got it. So basically, what I wanted to ask next is, why isn't the media covering this at all? I feel like I've never heard this topic once, brought it up, at least in the Western media over here on these news channels. I don't know if it's brought it up, where you might be. Emmanuel, you're on the other side of the globe. Jamila, you're in the UK. So can you guys talk about the media's role in this?
Barely mentioned here. Barely mentioned.
Yeah, would you guys mind talking about that? And feel free to take the discussion wherever you want in terms of that subject. Jamila, you can go next. You're waiting the last one.
Yeah, it has been covered by the media, I should say. There are plenty of really, really good video reports there. If anybody wants them, incidentally, it's if you go to savetherohingya.blogspot.com and click on videos, you can see all the most recent reports that are not propaganda. I don't list anything that is clear propaganda. But the news that is put out there is never shown as main headlines. It's never front page news. So it doesn't get noticed. And I would say that there has been silence from particular areas. I would say straight out Sky News, I don't think has ever covered it in recent years. And CNN did one very good report, and after that they've really been quite silent and a little bit on the boat people. Channel 4 have been excellent. They've been really good. But there's only so much one news channel can do. I know they've got one correspondent that covers the whole of Asia. At the moment he's tied up with North Korea, as many of the correspondents are. So whether this is intentional, that there's a lack of interest, what I would say is with uprisings, for example, you have the own people drilling up the media, going to the media stations. They've got good internet access, so they're passing on a lot of media, a lot of videos. The Rohingya have got this problem that's have been voiceless, and people who have spoken out have often been arrested, tortured, and killed. The internet connection is very, very poor, so it is hard to get information out, and they do live in a remote area, so there are logistical problems, actually, in reporting on the Rohingya. So I think it's a combination of difficulty and inconvenience, a lack of, well, there are some of their own people speaking out for them, but perhaps not as many in other areas where people are persecuted. But in addition to that, I would say there is likely to be some conflicting interests in terms of business, because a lot of media agencies will definitely and are in negotiations with the Burmese government. So it's that same old story, conflict of interests, and they might argue, well, we're trying to get into the country, so we have to tread very carefully, but that does actually stifle the truth coming out as well. So that is an issue.
Yeah. Emmanuel or Richard, do you want to add anything on top of that with regards to the media?
I'd like to.
Yeah, go ahead.
There is an element to the whole thing where you have major ethnic conflicts which involve serious human rights violations that are typically overlooked all the time, and it's outrageous. How disproportionate here focused on certain conflicts and not others. And I don't know. I don't really know if I can put my finger on exactly the reason why some get neglected and others don't. I mean, like in West Papua, in Indonesia, that's a big one. People aren't covering that. The Sorari people of Western Sahara, which is an issue partly between Morocco and Algeria as well. That's just not being covered. Yes, a noted professor who I spoke to who went out there said it was one of the worst police states he'd ever been to, and he'd been to plenty of ones which you think of first in terms of being bad police states. The Sri Lankan conflict in 2009, over 2008, 2009, it got overshadowed by Operation Cast Lead in Israel and Palestine. Operation Cast Lead was bad enough, but what happened in Sri Lanka was far worse. The reason why these things get overlooked is, to me, there isn't a moral reason for it. So I would put it down to, the internal workings of and the pressures that journalists experience, and to some degree editorial influence. But I think it's to do with emergent, automatic sort of factors which are structural, and but it's tragic. These things should be covered, and that's one of the reasons why I personally wanted to write more about the Rohingya, was because it wasn't being covered. Other issues like it weren't being covered.
Richard, you want to add anything on top of that, or?
I mean, Emmanuel's pretty thorough, tends to be. But you and I, we both live in the States, so our news is generally focused on North America and the Middle East, a little bit on Europe, and that's it. Maybe China, maybe North Korea. But I don't think we've ever had the chance to even notice what happens in Southeast Asia, at least in a mainstream news way, where we would know what's going on, just because nobody would understand, and maybe it wouldn't get ratings.
Right.
That's what I would assume.
Right.
And they think people are not smart enough to learn a new country.
Right, so just an interesting thing that I guess I'm not too sure how to phrase this into a question, but I see people in the text chat are talking about it. They're talking about the role of like Buddhists inside of this area. Is that like can you kind of can you kind of go into how that religion or those types of people are playing a role in this topic, and just if that makes sense, I'm assuming you guys know what I'm talking about, right?
Can I just say one particular thing? I'm really sorry, I don't mean to go.
No, go ahead.
Try and
you guys can.
But I just noticed one statement here. There's one guy here who's really liking to stir things up, and he's talking about how Muslims are trying to take over Burma, and I hope he's watching now. It's trying to take over Burma and so on and so on. This is the typical narrative where I got from monks and people that I spoke to when I was around Sitwe. Now, I would like those people. I like the person who's writing there to come with me and look at the child that I saw in the IDP camps who had half its skin burnt off because it has no access to decent health care. It's stuck with this horrific sort of deformity that's come from that. the people who within weeks will be denied adequate help of deaths at the hands of, as a result of the spread of waterborne diseases in the IDP camps. Actually, the army have far more guns than any imagined terrorist enemy that's trying to supposedly take over Burma. This is propaganda. I mean, there were groups like the ARNO who want sort of pretty low-level paramilitary sort of so-called resistance groups who wanted their own state, but they're very peripheral. They don't have a lot of power. The Burmese people crush them. But this sort of thing is being spread around. And you see this propaganda all the time, particularly coming from anti-Muslim monks like the famous man Uguratu, who lives in Mandalay. He's been spreading, anti-Muslim bigotry all the time, and who's linked to the 969 group, which both Rich and Jamila know, who are this nefarious bunch of people who are really helping to stir up, and to some degree lend their support to. It depends which representative of it, which sort of select demagogue wants to come out and stir up things which are linked to the violence there. But people, you can see just evidence in the chat that people really do believe, and I spoke to people who, you can see it in their eyes, sincerely believe that the Muslims were, wanted to create some war or terror against Burma, and it's really not happening. And the result of these beliefs and this propaganda is that people are overriding their own humanity, and they're not looking at this from an objective, humane position, where there are around 1 million people who are really in a desperate situation regarded by the UN, who are objective, or at least more objective about it, who are saying they're one of the most vulnerable people in the world. They're approaching what might end up as total full-scale ethnic cleansing if things aren't properly dealt with. It's that serious. And it's narratives like the one that this guy is rehearsing down here on the chat board that are going to help make that happen. And so I think he should he should produce some evidence for his assertions.
Right. Richard or Jamila, you want to add anything on top of that?
Yeah, I'd like to point out that not all Buddhists in Burma hate the Rohingya and all the Muslims. And what happened recently was there was a big attack on a town called Mektila, which was actually to Burmese Muslims. It seems the attacks have widened to not just be directed towards the Rohingya, but all Muslims in the country. And what happened then was so terrible. Many houses were burned and Muslims were slaughtered without mercy and entirely removed from the town centre. And now they're living in camps, many of them thousands in a football stadium, where they're denied access to even food that's been delivered. It's restricted to them. But what happened in that town, it was trying to be portrayed again in the media, the Burmese media, that it was ethnic tension. And what had happened is this monk Wirapu had been at that town previously preaching and distributing propaganda, and then this organised attack took place. But many of the Buddhists who live in that area risked their lives to save the Muslims, and are still going about trying the best they can to help them. There are many Buddhists that are against this violence, and there are signs of peaceful initiatives where people are stepping out despite criticism and saying this is wrong, and these are fantastic efforts and really to be encouraged. So I think it's important that Muslims and Buddhists who remain true to their peaceful teachings of their religion emphasise that this ethnic tension has been whipped up by propaganda, and it is down to responsible people on both sides to counteract this and say, no, this is wrong, it's not part of our teaching. And people on both sides are doing that. These comments in this chat, I'm always suspicious of these comments online because they always pop up at the convenient moments. And mostly I just don't engage with that kind of discussion and don't encourage it. It's hard to know how much of it is genuine as well.
Right, so here's what I was just going to say, guys. Just because in a few minutes, I have to run to a doctor's appointment, but that's a secondary thought. What I was going to say is, I want to leave you each with a last question. and then, unfortunately I have to end the recording, but since there are a bunch of people who are inside of the chat room right now, which is great for our first time doing this topic, if you guys want to hang around, you're more than welcome to continue your discussion and to address any questions which are being addressed right now inside of the chat. Like Kenneth asked something about the Philippines, so you're more than welcome to. What I was just going to ask you guys, lastly, is, what would be your message to the world regarding this topic, and whether people are misunderstanding something. What would be your message to the world in regards to this topic? And Emmanuel, you could go, then Richard, and then Jamila.
Sure. Basically, we've had countless times where the international community has said never again. In Rwanda they said it. After Sri Lanka, there's been this sort of hand-wringing, people saying we failed, we didn't do enough to stop massive ethnic violence in which sort of tens of thousands of people died. This could happen eventually in Burma. So we're at the point where we can stop that. So the international community has no excuses. They've seen examples of this. We're beginning to see signs that this could be heading towards full-scale ethnic cleansing if nothing's done, and something has to be done. And one thing that can be done is very, very simple and practical, is to get those countries that do have purchase over the Burmese government, pressure them into allowing the Rohingya to have full citizenship rights, and to find some way to sort of be able to, incorporate them into a regenerated Burmese economy, be able to, find some productive way for the ethnic disputes to be solved, and to invest in creating a more civilized Western Burmese Rakhine state where the two communities can live together. But it's just as simple as basically giving these people who've been denied for decades, basic human rights which they're entitled to under international law, and just making sure that they get them. I think development will come from that. That's just a very simple step, as well as preventing massive bloodshed.
Right, Richard, you want to go on ahead?
Mostly all I can do now is build off of the very good foundation Emmanuel built, or laid down. But yeah, we are approaching what could be very, very much pure ethnic cleansing, mass-scale killing, and it's entirely avoidable. The steps are so simple and so logical. It's completely possible to give citizenship, guarantee human rights, and avoid a serious massacre, where in other countries we haven't had this opportunity. These are real people who are facing real persecution, real just terrible, awful conditions, and there's a door to fix it, but time is running out to do that. And I would just want people to be aware, to spread awareness, and to act from that position.
Great, and Jamila?
Yeah, I would say, repeating what Richard has said, it's terrible what's happening to these people. It's awful to see human beings, any human beings, treated in this way, where they are faced daily with acts of arson, torture, rape, gang rape, starvation, untreated diseases. The extent of the persecution and the suffering of these people is unbelievable. You can hardly grasp the scale of it. And it's continuous and never ending. It's been going on for decades, but it's just got worse and worse and worse. And there's a lot of well-meaning organisations out there, but they're clearly not doing the right thing, because the situation for these people has got worse and worse. We have had a big online campaign to try and avoid a third massacre, and thankfully it does look like we are having results, and so far what we were anticipating hasn't happened, thanks to everybody's action. But what we are faced with now is another catastrophe, because rains are coming, and I believe it's in about 6 weeks' time, these paddy fields are going to be flooded. I believe there are more than 20,000 people actually living directly in the line of the floods. The Burmese government have no intention of moving them anywhere. So even if a massacre doesn't take place, if there isn't urgent international intervention to get these people out of these fields and into some kind of proper shelter, there are going to be massive deaths. That's just logical, and all the aid agencies are saying the same thing. So my message to everybody listening to this is actually you can make a difference. Every single person watching this can make a difference. Any one person can, because we all have access to the internet. And so through writing emails and tweeting people and contacting your government, contacting your MPs and saying this is disgraceful and shouldn't be happening in the world today, if we all do that, it will, I believe, definitely make a difference. And like Richard says, this is all completely avoidable. And that's all. Thank you.
Great. So, yeah, like I said, we've been speaking for now just over 50 minutes. I know we started a little bit late, but unfortunately I do have to go. Thank you so much, each of you for participating. And like I said, with a few people inside of the chat room still, and asking some other questions, I think, about this area of Asia, you're welcome to address any of their questions, and I'll get this video up on YouTube soon, and you'll be able to share it with whomever. All right.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Max.
You got it.